Welcome to Chaos Divided, your weekly dose of Wholesome Hammer. If you're a fan of what we do, we hope you'll subscribe and follow us along. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can find us on patreon.com/Chaos Divided 40K. This week, we're discussing the theming and lore of recent codexes and detachments and asking, is 10th edition more thematic? And I'm joined by the ever amazing Tanya the War Mistress this week.
Hi, how's it going?
Before we get into, I picked an orc quote actually in honor of you because you are also the War Mistress. So.
That's right.
So it's a war boss Braca from I think online comic or something, and it's now get out there and crush them all.
That's right.
Feels good. Feels orky.
It does feel orky. Yeah. I have not yet played with the new Orc Codex. I've been on a little bit of a break, but later today I have my first game with it. And I'm really excited to just, put some big stompy robots on the table. I think that's going to be really fun.
Well, and I think, the day we're recording this, points just came out for the new CSM Codex, so haven't played it, but seen a lot of the rules, and having seen a lot of the new codexes, I think what people are maybe missing in a lot of the conversations I'm seeing is that I think they're built more on fluff than they are on crunch. I think the goal is actually to create thematic fun detachments, not necessarily good meta balanced detachments, and I think that's maybe where some of the conversations are getting lost.
I agree, and I wonder, I feel like Warhammer is in a bit of an identity crisis right now because obviously they want it to be competitive, but their roots are just so firmly in sort of narrative-based games that I feel like they're really not sure how to make the codexes do both. However, I do feel like they kind of nailed it with the Orc Codex.
Yeah, and I think coming out of ninth felt more on the other side, where they were focusing more on rules, and that's why it kept escalating, because it kept being okay, how do we give you all the tools in the toolbox? And it lost so much of the flavor, because you were okay, everything is a tool in the toolbox, but then it didn't actually matter what it was, because they were just trying to find spots for everything. Whereas now the detachments actually seem to have a little bit of room to breathe, because you don't have stratagems that are faction wide, so you're not having to worry about how everything interacts with everything else, and enhancements are tied to a detachment rather than okay, here's a choice of relics that that either bust up some subfactions or are completely useless in all of the others.
Right. I guess I see where you're coming from. And I see where they're coming from, right? The detachments themselves are extremely fun and fluffy. We can even look at one of our biggest offenders right now, which is Necrons. And I think we can all admit that the detachments do make sense. So the main offender right now is Necrons. And while there are two particular detachments that, are very difficult and sometimes unfun to play against, we can still admit that they are fun and fluffy. They allow you to use your models in new ways. And I can definitely see where GW is coming from in them. I do think that focusing on competitive play is just something very new for the company that's been around for 40 years. So they just maybe don't know how to manage that side of things. If we all played how the game played 20 or 30 years ago, where we just sort of took stuff that we thought looked cool or made a story on the table, perhaps these rules wouldn't be particularly abrasive to play against.
Because even
but people don't play like that anymore.
mean, some people still do, but a lot of people don't. Well, even like the Hypercrypt one, which is probably one of the more busted detachments, brought back monoliths, which like I love. Yeah. When I walk into an event and somebody's got a monolith, I'm like, okay, respect. I love monoliths. Like that in my mind is a win. Does it mean that it doesn't need some attention? No, but I do love that like there's a way to play every model, and like monoliths are just like so specifically thematically Necrons, and they never seem to get any attention, and it actually like warms my heart that they are getting some love. Does that not mean that the detachment needs to maybe a little fixing up? Sure, but it does mean that every part of your codex is actually like somewhat viable.
Yes, and it is really nice to see these really iconic models getting rules that do allow them to be played. Since I started playing in 7th, I could probably have counted on one hand the amount of times that I saw a monolith on the table. So it is nice that people who, spent all that time putting together a horrendous model should actually get to play it,
Yeah, and I think like that's a good thing. But I think the struggle is, and like, I mean, to go on kind of the other side, like Custodes, I think are maybe struggling a bit with their codex. But I also think it was an attempt to make the whole codex usable.
Yeah.
Sisters being relevant and useful and usable in Custodes codex is new. That's a new idea, really. And at the same time, I feel like Custodes don't have the same depth of lore to draw on that, say, like Space Marines or Tyranids do. So they kind of had to work with what they had. And again, I don't think they were going like, oh, how do we make sure Custodes have all the tools in the toolbox? I think they were going like, hey, what's cool and lets everyone use everything.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's an older school idea. Like when I think of like 5th and 6th edition, like you were just like hoping everything was useful and there was like enough war gear to kind of fill in the pieces so anything could go on the table and function. And that was kind of Games Workshop's like level of concern for like competitiveness, and now 40k is it's a competitive beast, we'll say.
It is, and like as much as it's really cool to have all of these sort of compendiums of rules, and we've got, basically live updates for what's doing well and what's not, and that's really cool, but it also means that there's no real period of figuring it out for yourself. There's no real period of it being the Wild West where people are trying stuff to see what works, right? It's figured out before you even get the codex in your hands at this point. So immediately, as soon as you get the codex, or as soon as the codex is live in the wild, I should say, everybody's going to be playing against the toughest lists that could possibly be made with it. We talk about hobby leg, but even now with 3D printing being a thing and most tournaments allowing 3D printing, there's not really even hobby leg anymore. You don't actually have to go out and source, like some hard to get models like wraiths or whatever. Like you can just 3D print something to sort of act like it, and away you go. So I think as much as having those resources is really good for people who want to pursue that, all of that stuff trickles down into narrative play. It trickles down into casual play at an alarmingly fast rate, right? Like I played in a crusade match I was playing Custodes, and it was against knights. And of course there's a Calidus assassin, because that's like, you don't leave home without it in competitive play. And it doesn't need to make any sense in your narrative, even though you're playing narrative play, because, everybody says like, you have to take that in order to play the game. Not even just to play competitive, just to play the game. So Yeah, it trickles down really fast, which is kind of, I don't know, unfortunate for people like myself who, you know, really just want to bring what I want to bring and play at the lower tables. Even at the lower tables, I can't have a close game anymore if I play that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a shame, and I think it's almost like it's an overall failing of the rules that they can get so busted. Like we were talking about this before we started recording. The points are out for the CSM Codex, and there's an enhancement in the Alpha Legion, the Deceptors, called Soul Link, which allows you to switch the datasheet abilities between your character and any other character other than Epic Heroes in the Codex. Which, when I saw that, I was like, that's going to be a 30 to 40 point enhancement, and it is a 5-point enhancement, which I think just kind of summarizes how little they understand how abusable the rules in 10th are. Because being able to just be like, hey, every command phase, I'm just going to pick whatever data sheet makes my unit a Death Star. Like, that's cracked. Like, that's so abusable. And, like, your top tier meta players are going to be like, well, I'm going to do this character to round 1, and this character round 2, and this character round 3, and this unit's just going to go around and be like, dead. And no one's going to be able to stop it until they make it a 40-point enhancement. But clearly no one at Games Workshop was like, hey, is this abusable?
I think that we can also see that there is a disconnect for sure between the rules writers and whoever is trying to like balance things within the game itself. Just looking at the points in the back of the Codex and then the points changes that immediately come out. Like, why are we even putting points in here at this point?
Yeah.
Right?
That feels like a left... you know, having played before Warhammer Community was even really a thing. Yeah, like... points updates didn't used to even be considered really. It was what was in the Codex, and that feels like a huge I guess remnant of old editions. Yeah, because nowadays you don't even look at it. Like, you don't look at the points in the back of the book.
No, they honestly shouldn't be there.
There should maybe be a blurb of like, go check the whatever Munitorum field guide.
I mean, they do have a little QR code now.
Oh, they're moving up in the world.
Yeah, so I mean, but honestly, like, you could save the ink and you could save the paper by just putting the little QR code at the beginning of the data sheets. Done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it does seem like they're almost at odds with each other. Like, whoever is writing the codexes has like a different objective than whoever is balancing the game.
Yeah, and it really does feel like it's compartmentalized. So it feels like the people who are writing the codexes don't convene to like talk to one another to be like, hey guys, what are you doing in terms of power level? Okay, well, what are we doing in terms of power level? It's almost like that's compartmentalized, and then all of the people who are writing the rules are compartmentalized from the people who are creating the missions and who are balancing things. It just doesn't really feel like it's all coming together neatly. And I think this goes back to what I said about them not really, because competitive is such a new thing for them, that they don't realize that in order to do competitive well, all of the pieces have to come together during development. All the pieces have to be balanced to one another. It's just feeling very disjointed. I think they're having an identity crisis within the company.
Well, even the idea of every character imparts some kind of special ability to every unit they join. Like, when you look at older editions where characters joined units, they didn't necessarily change the models they were with. It was more of a just like, hey, they're a bodyguard unit, or they're just like connected in some way, shape, or form, but they're not necessarily, you know, intrinsically linked. And I think that's another thing that like 10th is new with, is this idea of like every character affects their unit in some way, shape, or form. And every unit then is modified. So you have all of these variables that, when you're thinking about like, oh, this rule can't be like that busted, and then you're not thinking of like the 35 different ways it's going to interact with every other model's like datasheet abilities. Like, I think of like one of the combos I like to run is like a big squad of legionaries with Lucius. Well, if he's on an objective, nothing can kill that unit, and they have fight first because they reroll all their wounds, and they're just like, and like, I'm looking at the CSM detachments. That Renegade Raiders one is very much exciting me. So that means they're all going to be AP3 now. So like, whatever you throw at them, they're just going to like shish kebab on their swords.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of interactions that, like, again, are you really thinking about that when you say, hey, we'll give this unit reroll all wounds? Because, like, again, you still did put them with Abaddon, who does not need that ability.
Yeah. And does that feel thematic and fluffy to, like, change how let's use Space Marines, for example. Like, these are battle brothers. They have been fighting together in a squad for perhaps millennia. And does it make any sense that they're going to fight completely differently just based off of what character is leading them?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that particularly makes sense, right? So when we look at the detachments themselves, the detachments seem to be fairly fun and fluffy and like make sense, and they're trying to get you to play the game in different ways. But some of the rules on the data sheets, to me, I just look at it and quite often I'm like, but that doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah. And I think, well, you mentioned this before we started recording, that maybe not every unit should have a special ability. And when they announced 10th and they showed off some of the things, I was like, oh, these are some fun things. I didn't expect every single datasheet to have an ability. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why they would have thought that makes sense, because, like, does a Termagant need a special ability? Does a Guardsman need a special ability?
Right. I mean, shouldn't Battle Line's special ability just mean that they have more OC?
Yeah.
Shouldn't that just be its special ability?
Like, unless you're like an elite, like, Custodes makes sense.
Sure.
Like, you're like big fancy armies. But like absolutely everything having this like, oh, and because of this does this thing better. Like, it just creates too many interactions that then like kind of ruin all of the good work you're doing elsewhere. It's like, okay, this detachement's fun and fluffy, but this one stratagem combined with this character in this particular unit, like what they did with Drukhari. They made like the Incubi Archon bomb thing, because it's just like so many rules overlapping on top of each other that it kills everything.
Yeah.
Which is just like, should there be a unit that kills everything? Probably not.
Yeah, and I also feel like with all of the universal special rules on top of everything, I think that means that they probably could have dialed back the amount of like sort of special stuff that each individual unit gets. Like, you've got all these keywords which are essentially special rules, then you've got special rules, and then the weapons have special rules. So yes, in a way it's more simplified, but it's not simple, right? Because there's way more ways that all of these things can interact. And sometimes it is fun and fluffy, but a lot of times it just doesn't make sense when you put all of the pieces together.
Well, even like I think of like, in order to simplify combi weapons, they made them into these like basically mega stupid bolters that murder all infantry.
Yeah.
But it's like, would you rather have a combi Melta and a combi Flamer, or like just like the death gun that kills everything? Which feels very weird. Because like, you turned, in order to make it as equally useful as like a combi Plasma or a combi Melta, you're like, okay, well, we have to give you something back, but within the rules, we're just going to create this like weird jank death gun.
Yeah.
Which is then like, okay, And if you are an army who has them, you're just like, goodbye infantry. And if you're an army that doesn't have them, you're salty about it.
Yeah.
Because like the anti-interaction, like I discovered this actually in the middle of a tournament. I was going up against Thousand Suns. The Master of Possession has anti-Psyker 2+, and then if you put them with Possessed, they get Dev Wounds when they do a Dark Pact. 5 Possessed and a Master of Possession downed Magnus from full wounds in like 1 round.
Wow.
Like between shooting and the charge, like fighting. And I was just
I
like,
don't even feel bad about it. That's amazing.
It is, but it's like, I was like halfway through on any, and like my opponent was like, "Can you like read that?" I was like, read it to him, and he was just like, "That, yeah, that's how that works." And I was like, "This feels busted."
Yeah, one of the guys in my 40K team plays Thousand Suns. He's one of the best Thousand Suns players in Canada, and yeah, I just oftentimes feel like I have no play into him. So just knowing that you can do that makes me feel a little bit better inside.
Oh, and I eat Thousand Suns for breakfast, like without.
Oh, so nice.
Actually that game was a bit of a landslide, and like he's a good Thousand Suns player, and I just like. So yeah, if you ever want to just run 3 Masters of Possession with 3 squads of Possessed, because the Master of Possession's ranged attack also has precision.
Nice.
So you just do 6 devastating wounds to every character, and you just murder all of them.
Oh man!
And then the Thousand Suns fall apart. So you should play CSM next time you play them if you want to like really rip them apart.
You know, I was considering starting a Chaos Space Marines army, but then I was like, then I have to paint all that trim. I don't know. I should probably just keep with what I have.
It's but you can beat Psychers.
I could beat Psyker.
But that's what I mean. Like the anti-interaction with Dev Wounds is just like such a weird thing that then like I don't know, there's so many. I feel like every time you look at new rules, like looking through the CSM, I was just like, ooh, that's a way to get Dev Wounds better. That's a way to get Dev Wounds better. Because you're just like, I'm tired of invuln saves. So just like, what if you didn't have them? What if you just like died?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do feel like the plethora of special rules throughout the entirety of Codexes kind of makes them not special.
Well, because we're starting to see now, like, the CSM Codex and the Space Marine Codex probably have 4 detachments that are identical.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like, which is kind of fair. Like,
is there that big of a difference
between Iron Hands and Iron Warriors? No. They're kind of just like different flavors of the same, pie.
Yeah.
But still, it's like when you're seeing like the exact same rules appearing over and over again, like you're like, okay, maybe you don't have as many ideas as you thought you were gonna have.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, how do we know that these teams even talked?
True. Well, yeah, I guess that
right?
Goes back to
because
the
like
issue.
it's like you said, is there really that much of a difference between these 2 legions that essentially have always kind of done the same thing, but one's good and one's bad? I mean, maybe they came to those same conclusions without actually talking to one another. I do feel like if they would have talked to one another, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Or maybe this is a way that they're intentionally trying to balance these 2 factions against one another, because they are kind of like the perfect adversaries in lore for each other.
Yeah, I guess we haven't seen the CSM Codex in the wild yet, but even within the Orc Codex, it feels like there's, and actually the Tau Codex especially, felt like they just kind of like wrung out a bunch of ideas from other things.
Yeah.
Like giving Tau a 3-inch deep strike offends me to the absolute core of my being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, if we're being like looking at the lore, a Tau Fire Warrior is like 15 years old. So a Crisis Suit operator is like, I don't know, maybe 19 years old. You're telling me some like teenager is like able to do these like complex aerial maneuvers to just like bomb in the absolute perfect location from a moving vehicle that is like in the atmosphere? No, that makes no sense at all.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know, like the presence of 3-inch deep strike is, across half the codexes at this point. The presence of recycling your units back, reinforcement style, is in, it seems like, a third of all the codexes.
Mm.
It's got it. Yes, they are fun and fluffy. Yes, they do kind of make sense between them, the different factions, that they should share these rules, but it doesn't make them feel special. So
That's fair.
fluffy, yes. Special, no. And I actually don't like having really difficult to play around rules being so prevalent. I don't like how prevalent the 3-inch deep strike is. I don't like that in some detachments you could pretty much just use it on anything that has deep strike. So yeah, I do feel like there are definite problems. So
I don't think in a game that is so shooting friendly, you should be able to just put something that close.
yeah.
Like that just it makes it so that you're like, oh, okay, I actually can't hide from you.
Yeah. There's literally no way that I have any agency against this unless I solely focus on screening you out, and then I'm not scoring points. So either way, it feels bad. Either way, I'm losing something that costs a lot of points, more than likely, or I'm just going to continuously be down on points and I'm going to have no way to win this game. This particular mechanic, I just don't like it.
I don't think deep striking should be guaranteed at all.
Oh, like, we're going back to the old days.
I am 100% in favor of strategic reserves. Sure, you're coming off the side of the board, guaranteed. You put it where you said it is, it's there.
Yeah.
Deep strike should be failable. It should be inconvenient. It should be difficult. And
I agree. I do miss the scatter dice.
Right? Like, there's something to be said about, okay, I'm going to put my big scary thing right here. Oh, actually, it fell into a crater and died. Like,
yeah.
But, because again, well, we've talked about this, risk versus reward. If I'm going to put my Death Star here, where I want it to be, and it is completely to my benefit, there should be a negative to that, which is that I could lose it, or it goes in the wrong spot, or maybe it goes in a better spot. Maybe it scatters 6 inches towards, and now I have a 3-inch charge instead of a 9-inch charge. So there's still another level of risk and reward there. But yeah, I think deep strike should be unreliable.
Yes. I mean, I'm okay with it even staying 9 inches, right? Because then the opportunity to be screened out is there. Yeah. Right? But yeah, sometimes I do miss like the old ways where, you had scatter dice and you maybe had to like guess at ranges. Like I was 100% against guessing at ranges, but now with things being so reliable in a dice game, I think I would be totally okay with bringing in these elements of risk versus reward and these elements of chance and these, just oddball rules that we used to have to keep people honest.
One of the things that, like, having access to advance and shoot and charge is when somebody does the, how far do you move and what's the range of your guns? And they move like 1/8 of an inch outside of what you could possibly move. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, this doesn't, like, really? Is this how we're going to play this game? Like, yeah, sure, it's best for you to do it that way, and it makes sense from, like, a competitive standpoint, but you're like, okay, if we're talking about, like, recreating a war scene...
Orcs wouldn't do that.
No! But... And, like, our guard organized enough to do that? Are, like... You know what I mean? Like, our...
Yeah.
Gene Stealer cults, like, smart enough to do that? Like, no!
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there's just like, you're like, okay, no, like maybe Space Marines might be like, okay, we will stay outside of tactical range of,
sure.
But like that's the one faction that would.
Right. And that's why I think I actually have the most fun usually playing against orc players and playing against world eaters. Like, yeah, you could be at a tournament playing against them and they know that that's what they have to do and they'll do it in a tournament, but you see this look on their face like it actually disgusts them a little bit to be playing like that. So like
Okay, but all
knowing
it
that
usually takes is a little like, come on, really? And then they're like, you're right, and they just bomb off the board.
yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't know, I don't play a super shooty army ever. And whenever I play World Eaters, they're like, I'm just gonna charge you, and I'm like, yeah, you are. And we actually get to have like, rock'em sock'em robots, and you can tell they're actually happy. Same with orc players, they're like, I'm just gonna come at you, and I'm like, you might not like what happens when you get here, but you can do it.
They will, but they will.
They will.
Yeah.
Like the amount of times I've killed Gazgul Thraka with Abaddon, and Abaddon also dies at the same time, is like, it's too many. But it's amazing every time. It's just like, I'm gonna throw Thraka at you, be like, you might not like what happens. They'll be like, oh yeah, I will. And then they just both obliterate each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a good time. And that's what Warhammer's about. It's just like silly nonsense. It isn't, I don't know, my vision of Warhammer is not, if we're measuring 16ths of an inch, we have lost the vision.
Yeah. And the more that I take a step back from playing so much 40K, because my local area is super competitive. Like, I have a game with one of my favorite opponents ever tonight, but it is only because I signed up for an RTT ages ago and completely forgot that I did so. And now I have to play on Saturday and I haven't even cracked open this codex yet. So, even now, my first game back in months is a competitive game, right? It's the only way that I have to play the game. And as I step back and I sort of do a lot of thinking about why I even started playing this game to begin with, the more I realize, like, I don't like competitive terrain. I love a beautiful board. I don't like playing against unpainted models or with unpainted models. And in RTTs, usually they're open to people who have not painted their stuff, right? And so I'm starting to realize that for me, it's like the combination of everything that is what makes me happy about playing Warhammer. So it's varied armies, painted models, nice terrain, a narrative, fun and fluffy, and laughing with people at the table. Like, I need all of that to enjoy the game to the fullest. And I'm just not really getting that playing competitive. But I do get to go and I get to be a TO at a narrative event with Play on Tabletop. I'm so excited for that. It's really refreshing to see like the complete opposite way of how I can experience the game locally happening in our Discord for this event. People are sharing their armies, and it's really refreshing to see weird things that you would never see in the tables at an event, like a competitive event. It's just really fun to see them really, really working hard to get their stuff painted to a certain level and in a way that makes sense for their narrative. I'm really excited to go to this event. I think it's going to be great.
I recently started on the Patreon adapting old narrative missions to 10th edition.
Ooh.
And I there's one up there now. It's what is it? It's evacuation. So the whole goal is, if you're the defender, you need to get a model basically to a shuttle on one end of the board, and then your opponent starts on the other end. And it actually didn't take a ton to adapt to 10th. Like, the bones of a good narrative mission in 10th are largely there. But I reintroduced a way to do unreliable deep strike that doesn't need a scatter die. And yeah, so it's based on you roll a die and you move towards table edges. So you still so you put it down first, you roll your die. On a 5 or 6, it goes where you thought it would. On a 1 through 4, it then goes towards one of the table edges. So you could throw it off the table or throw it into terrain and it just dies. and just introduce some like ways of like in the original mission, like it's from 5th edition, it used to be really hard to just shoot one character out of a block.
Yeah.
So like had to give it like lone operative, but then also I was like, okay, it needs to be able to stand up because like nowadays everything can kill everything.
Yeah.
So they're just kind of like adapting some of the rules so that you know, and even using like there's basically like everyone gets one fixed secondary, so everyone has to take no prisoners because the whole thing is also built around like killing each other. And then you get to pick one other secondary, and then your primary is basically like, does the guy live or die, and when does he live or die? It determines your primary points.
So it's like how missions used to be back in the day, and they were really fun. Yeah.
But it still fits within like the 100-point scoring and your like 10th edition rules, and like, you know, I turned like rending into dev wounds, which is basically the same thing, but so it's just a way of like adapting earlier missions, and it made me realize that 10th edition is so close to working narratively that if they actually just like created a few missions off to the side, like people would realize how narrative it can be.
Yeah,
because it's basically just like make things a little more inconvenient.
Yeah. And Crusade is not it for me.
Because Crusade just feels like slightly different competitive missions.
It does. It's slightly less balanced competitive missions. And yeah, I just feel like they're also kind of boring. I remember, and it makes me sad. Do you remember the mission, The Relic? It used to be in like every single main rulebook ever, where you had to like run out into the middle of the table, grab a relic, and then the unit that had the relic couldn't do anything else and had to just like hold on to this thing for the entire game, or they died and dropped it, you know?
Yeah.
And now people don't even know about that particular mission anymore. And that one was my favorite because it forced you to go out into the middle and do stuff.
Yep.
Right? Like, even as a shooting army, okay, so you shot whatever it was that was on the relic in the middle, fine. But you have to go out and get it. If you don't get the relic, you don't win the game, right?
Yeah.
So it was like really dynamic. I really, really liked missions like that. And I also think I prefer, for casual games, a mission that just sort of has an end game goal. I feel like when you're just having a laugh and you're playing casually, maybe it's a pickup game with somebody that you like never met before and you want to know more about this person, you just like have fun. Sometimes when you have to, at the end of each turn, sit down and like tally out all of your points that you got that turn, I feel like sometimes it takes you away from the table, away from interacting with your opponent in a fun way. And yeah, I would like to see missions where it has less bookkeeping.
You know what? I played an old world event this weekend, and the way you score an old world is just like at the end of the game, who killed more wins. And yeah, being able to go like turn to turn and not score anything, and it was just literally just like, oh, it's your turn now, and we just kept going.
Right?
It's true. There wasn't the like, oh, did you score? Was it the big deploy or the small deploy? What was behind enemy lines there? Like,
yeah, or like, oh, I'm 3 points off what you have. I guess we got to go back to the very start of the game and work through everything that we scored again to find out where I went wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was somewhat refreshing to just be like, hey, let's just play this game and figure it out at the end.
Yeah.
So no.
Yeah.
Well, this gives me an idea. Maybe the next one I do, I'll try and adapt the relic to the 10th, so that it's yeah. I think there's a lot of ways to make that work.
I'm really excited to go to this narrative event because I get to see how one is run, and then basically take everything that I learn from this, and then I'll get to go and do that for my local people. Because I actually ran my first event. It was Age of Sigmar, and it was really refreshing because a lot of the people there had never been to a tournament before, ever. But it was super refreshing because most of those folks wanted the best painting prize. And that's unheard of, really. in competitive 40K. Like there's maybe like the odd person who's going in specifically for that, but it's kind of like everybody wants best general. And if they also get best painted, then, you know, it's like
I need to tell you a story of someone, the last 40K tournament I went to. Someone brought for the painting competition, they brought Nagash. But it was a 40K tournament, and they were like, okay, so in the rules, it didn't specify that the unit had to, like, the model had to be in my army, and I was like, this is the most, like, meta-chasing way to win game a painting. And it was beautiful. I was glad that I got to see it. It was a beautiful Nagash. But I was like, is this really the spirit of the rules? And he was just like, well, it's my best painted model, and I was like, fair enough, I guess, but I don't know if that's the spirit of the competition.
It's not. That would be actually a really great topic one day, is to talk about the spirit of the game.
Oh, I feel like that has gotten so lost. The amount of time, actually that same event, I went up against a list. It was somebody playing like salamanders, like the Firestorm, and I did very well. I won by like 60 points, but it was the least fun list to play. It was like 2 airplanes full of eradicators, like the big Melta guys, and then just a bunch of flamer squads in drop pods. Yeah. I was like, this is not enjoyable. And like, even like Buddy showed up at the table and was just like, hey, my list is pure bull. It's gonna do nonsense. It's just the way it works. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be a good time. And like, it was the least satisfying victory, because I was like, this was not fun. Like, all I was doing was like using 10th nonsense rules to overcome your 10th nonsense rules. And like, no, but like, this is not enjoyable. You're just like he blew up almost half of my army turn 1. And I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to even play this game. And then he just couldn't score because I hemmed him in. And I was just like, this is bad for both of us.
Yeah.
No, but like, is anyone having fun with this? And but he thought he could win with it, so that's why he brought it. And I'm just like, when I build a list, I'm like, hey, can someone interact with this, and can we have a good time? Like, that's why when I play orcs or world eaters, we have a good time. I don't like playing knights because I can't interact with them.
Yeah, I do feel like non-interactivity is it's like the key in the recipe to an unfun game, because even Thousand Suns quite often can be quite unfun because of their non-interactivity. But not only that, but they stop you from playing your game. So it's like you can't even interact with your own rules or your own stat line, right? And I guess because those rules exist, I mean, is that in the spirit of the game? I mean, obviously, GW wants you to use those rules, otherwise they wouldn't have written them.
But I think there's a difference between I can push everything to the max and my opponent and I can have a fun game. Like the Thousand Suns turning off armor saves, you're like, cool.
That shouldn't exist either.
That's great, I guess, but like, for you that you get to do that. But yeah, like having something with you play guard. Your
Baneblade
roster,
doesn't have an armor save anymore. Sick.
I'm gonna kill it with flamers now.
Yeah.
Which makes no sense.
It doesn't.
So there's a lot of just like, wow, this just isn't fun for anyone involved in this, is it? And I feel like Eldar, like one of the biggest issues with Eldar this entire time has just been like, they don't care what game you're playing. They just do whatever they want.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the same with, it's like Imperial Knights. It's like, you have to roll dice, dipshit. Like,
yeah.
They're just like 2s and 2s and 2s and, I have rerolls, whatever.
Yeah.
Everything I decide to do just happens. And you're like, great.
So is it up to... how do we establish what is in the spirit of the game? Like, I guess how you do it in a pickup game is through the pregame talk.
Yeah.
Right? But how do you do it for an event?
I mean, I think if we think back to why does everyone hate Tau?
I don't hate Tau.
No, but it has been
I
a
know it's a
very.
meme.
I started playing Tau 15 years ago, and I feel like I have never lived it down in some people's minds. Like, it's beyond it's a trope. Like, it is hardwired in to like make fun of Tau, but Tau are designed to be uninteractable.
Yeah.
In recent editions, they have not been good at that, but early editions, they were a shooting army that had a bunch of ways to like get cover and move fast and not interact with anyone.
Right.
And boards used to be bigger, so you used to be able to just like hide wherever you wanted to, and everything just did whatever it wanted to. And everyone collectively was like, well, that's stupid. But now every army seems to do that.
Yeah.
And we seem to have been like, oh, LOL Tau, rather than like, LOL, your army doesn't interact with mine. Like,
Yeah.
We're not actually playing a game. We're not playing a game together. You're playing solitaire and you're making me play solitaire.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of why like blue deck players in Magic the Gathering are kind of like, oh, you play blue. I bet you play blue, right? It's the non-interactivity. It's because at the end of the day, it's like, it's a game. Both people should get to play.
I mean, if you think of like the rules of improv, it's like you always say yes. So if your army makes everyone say no, like, is that fun?
In my opinion, no. It's not fun.
No. And part of it is not every faction is blue.
Right.
So,
and not every faction has access to blue pieces. So it's not like you could make a blue and green deck from every faction. No.
Exactly. And I think of like, how many Space Marine players have you gone against that have multiple infiltrator squads in them? And do you think they
almost everyone
those?
I feel like the people who play exclusively for competitive, yes, they want to take those. They wish they could take 6.
Okay, but are they bringing it because they think the rules are good, or are they bringing it because of all the amount of 3-inch deep striking nonsense they're trying to avoid?
Both. I think it's both.
Okay, but if you were a very fluffy thematic painter, hobbyist, Space Marine player,
you only want to bring one if that's what you're into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet we're seeing a bunch of them being brought because it is a no to everyone else's no. So you're just like layering no's on top of no's. Like, when the CSM thing came out and Deceptors have the 12-inch no deep strike, I feel like, the couple videos I saw that were talking about it were just like, this is going to be really good. And you're like, because it turns off everyone else's nonsense.
Yeah.
It's a no to your no. So we're just like layering no's on top of each other now, which again is what blue is in Magic the Gathering. But it's like, is that fun for everyone involved that we just like layer defensive nonsense on top of each other to make up for the fact that the rules encourage non-interaction?
I mean, I think for me, the answer is just, I think that the rules could be written better. And honestly, like, I've been saying this for a really long time. I think that you can actually have the fun and fluffy rules, and I think that you can make it more competitive as well. I think that you can have your cake and you can eat it too. But I also think that what would really help is if GW found, and we all know people who do this, if they found the people who can immediately pick up a codex, read it once, and tell you the wombo combos. I'm sure you know somebody who can do it. I know several people who can do it. And I feel like if they had a team of even 5 people all doing it, the game would end up being balanced because they would find the janky stuff and it could be addressed.
Yeah.
But you'd have to find those people, and you'd also have to pay them quite a bit because chances are they are working in cushy analytical jobs already.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about the people that I know that can do it, and like one of them works in psychology and the other one is a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
But
You
got to pay them, but they would save you so much money in the long run, I think, because less people would leave the game. Either because it's too competitive or it's too fluffy and like you're not reaching that happy middle ground.
Well, and I think your point here almost it almost proves that they're writing rules from a thematic fun. This sounds fluffy and exciting, and they're not actually thinking through, okay, how does this interact 4, 5, 6, 7 steps removed from just like the rule in isolation, when you're like, that sounds cool and fun, and you're like, okay, but how's that going to interact with the 37, data sheet abilities that it's going to interact with, and then the stratagems that are going to layer on top of that? And when you're like now 5 or 6 points removed, which then also interacts with the missions. Like, one of the biggest issues with the Leviathan chapter approved is all of the secondaries that you don't interact with.
Yes. Yep.
Like, if this new chapter approved has missions that or actions that finish in your opponent's turn, you solve a ton of the nonsense.
I also feel like introducing a reason to take more battle line will potentially add a little bit less lethality to the game, right? Because you can't just take 3 of everything that's good and not take these wimpy little battle line units, because then you're not going to be able to get, what looks like at least quite a few of the secondaries that are in this new deck. So I'm hoping, I just do try to be an eternal optimist. So I am hoping that by putting this need in, there's just going to be less super powered stuff that's going to be.
Well, and I think it also helps balance your more elite, like, Custodes have the toughest battle line unit in the game. And I think of like, if you're having to do actions that finish not in your turn, okay, if you're a Custodes player, your unit reliably is going to not die. Compared to, 5 swooping hawks that you just like bombed across the board to do deploy teleport homers in my deployment zone, and then I instantly kill them the next turn, but you still have 2 more squads of them and you don't care.
Yeah.
Like, if you have to actually hold on to things and things don't finish immediately, and you as the opponent have the opportunity to engage with it, I think you fix a lot of this, like, this noping. Like, the just pure, like, no, I don't care what you do. Like, I think we talked about Age of Sigmar. The amount of the rise in just like, oh, I'm going to deploy however I deploy. I don't care what you do. You just, you do your deployment.
Yeah.
Like, that even maybe goes away because you're like, oh, where did you put your battle line units? Which objectives are you prioritizing? Like, I need to know how you're going to score because I am going to try and interact with that.
Yeah.
Rather than just like everything does everything.
Yeah. I definitely can see that there are. Now that I know that there's new decks coming out, I do see how that could be a way that they can address some of the issues for sure. And like, do I feel like I've been personally hurt by GW before? Yes. Am I willing to give them another chance? Yes. The eternal optimist. Do I think they can change? Yes. I do think that there is a way that they can learn to keep the fun and fluffy, but also maybe not break the factions at the same time.
I mean, I think even the fact that they are focusing on the fun and fluffy, because you can learn how to balance, you can learn how to like build rule sets, but if you don't have like a creative, fun-loving heart to it, that's the one you can't teach.
Yeah.
Like, you have to like if if we're sitting here kind of talking and saying like, the folks who write the codexes don't understand the rules as well as they should, but they love the factions and they like love the lore and they love the fluff of it, which is the part that is hard.
Yes. Yeah.
So
it
like
is the
they've
hardest
done
part
the hard part.
Yeah.
They just need to find some people that actually know how to like extrapolate data into like correlating actions.
Yeah.
And think 9 steps ahead as to like, okay, how does like this interact with everything else in the game, and like how do these like, you know, even just like talking about the like re-rolling 2s and 2s, like
Yeah.
what does it mean when you take chance out of a chance game?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think the game would feel better if we played with less points?
So I've often talked, one of my favorite games of Warhammer was a 750 point game I played, because you play on the smaller board.
Yeah.
So it was actually more stuff on a smaller board than that board size normally plays at.
Okay.
And because of that, you had kind of more things, but you also were like interacting constantly because you couldn't hide from each other. So I don't know if it's necessarily less points. I think it comes back to the interaction thing. It's the like, you know, I mean, we maybe should look at what does it mean to have a 12-inch like No Man's Land over a 24-inch. Like, we've never really also gone the other way of like what happens if you really force interaction. Because like, what does it mean if world leaders are just in your face? And because do you see people actually deploy along the back anymore? Other than the Bellicor bomb thing where you just like are gonna throw everything back up into deep strike anyways?
No, because if you deploy just along the back, you're losing the game. You're losing points. You're losing the primary. Straight up.
Yeah.
If you deploy on the back.
But having played Tau in earlier editions, you that was a regular thing to do because you were faster than everyone else. So you actually wanted the maneuverability of somebody moving into the middle so you could move out to the flanks. Or if they moved into the flanks, you would move into the middle.
Sure.
So you could actually use that, like... So, I don't know. I feel like... I don't know if the points value... Because points also are so meaningless now.
I just think, like... In a way, it feels like some factions in 2,000 points has the perfect answer for literally everything. So... Sometimes I feel like if we played 1,500 points, we would still be able to get goodies and tools, right? And I know that we would because I've played Knights in Crusade, and I know you can have tools and goodies, right? Okay. But you wouldn't have all of the tools. You would have to make decisions like, okay, well, how much of my list can I really afford to devote to just, you know, nullifying deep strike? How much of my list can I really afford to put in battle line? How much can I afford to put in this like big super heavy type thing? Like, it really makes you make those decisions, whereas at 2,000 points I feel like the decisions are not difficult.
You know what? As you were talking about this, I had a realization. I'm talking about older editions, and actually, fun fact. So my Tau collection, which was almost 2,500 points in 5th edition, is now 1,600 points worth of Tau.
Yes. Yep.
So when I'm talking about these older editions, yeah, I think, and I guess, yeah, when I said points are meaningless, points have become so inconsequential that you're right. You can have everything in a 2,000 point art. I guess 2,000 points is almost turned into what used to be a 3,000 point game.
Yeah. So, and I'm saying this as somebody, like, I made my first orc list with the new codex. I'm going to do Dread Mob because that's just what I like. I'm that fun and fluffy player. Let's go. But even with a Morkanaut and 2 Gorkanauts, I was listing off my list to my husband, and he's like, wait, there's still more in this list. I was like, there's a lot in this list. There is so much. They decreased the points again. Like, I just have so much stuff at 2,000 points. Even in Dread Mob, it's a lot.
Yeah, no, I just built my first like CSM list with the new points, and they came down as well. And through 10th, CSM has probably lost 20% in points overall. And then they're even lower than the index values were for a lot of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was, as I was going through, I'm like, I'm playing a horde army now. Like, I think I'm going to have 80 models effectively in a power armor army. I'm going to have 80 models on the table.
Yeah.
That feels stupid.
And then when you consider like how cheap everything is, how many models are on the table, but then you consider every single one of those units has at least one special rule, and more than likely at least one universal special rule, and probably one of their weapons has a special rule, you know, and we have all this stuff on the table. It's becoming unmanageable for casual players.
Yeah, so I guess would the answer maybe be like just a across the board 20% point increase?
Yeah, maybe. Or we just,
that would get
or do we take the agency back as players, and do we just say, okay, about 20%, let's just play 1750 or whatever. Like maybe we just play down the points.
Yeah, I guess if you're talking about organizing an event, yeah, I think you're probably playing at 1,500 points would accomplish the same thing, or even 1,600 points, I guess.
Yeah, because it's nice to think like, oh, well, what should GW do? But at the same time, I feel like sometimes we forget, like, we have the power. Like, you're writing your more narrative kind of rules for 10th edition. That's great. Me as a potential tournament organizer, I also have the power to sculpt the game into something that is more like what I would want to play, right? Is that something that other people would want to play? Well, I would have to take the chance on the event to see if people sign up for it. But I have that power, and I feel like sometimes we give that power to GW maybe like a little bit too easily. We can absolutely do things ourselves to make the game play the way that we would prefer it to play.
I think that's an interesting, because I'm even thinking like, because those last 500 points are often where you're like, oh, I'll just put, like, I guess I could put this in, or I guess and you're right, 1,500 is probably where the old 2,000 used to be, where you're like, I can't quite fit everything and I have to make choices.
Yeah. At 1,500, can I take my Baneblade?
Yeah. Can you afford the, like, 700 point wombo combo?
Right?
Because you can take it, but you will not be able to score anymore.
Yeah. Is it also, for a fun and fluffy player, I don't think it bothers them, right? Because they're just going to take what they were going to take anyway. I think it really comes down to affecting more competitive players who are... I know people around me who won't even play anything less than 2,000 points, and they won't play any format besides like GT standard 2,000 points, GW map layouts. Like, they won't play anything else. Even pickup games, they won't play anything else.
That sounds like no fun at all. Because even
kind of no fun.
Yeah, I have a game scheduled for this evening, and like, I like terrain to be fair, but not necessarily mirrored.
Yeah.
Like, when I set up terrain, like, I don't sit there and measure it. Like, not in a tournament, you know what I mean? It's like, let's kind of put it in a place where, like, there isn't shooting lines across the board.
Yeah.
But also, like, you can easily move around and, like, actually engage with each other. And, like, once you get away from the UKTC or WTC, like, terrain layouts, you're like, oh... terrain can actually be fun and not just like perfectly balanced, which is not balanced at all, I guess.
But like at the same time, you're literally playing against the same terrain layout all the time. You figured out that puzzle. You deploy the same way every time. Is this not getting boring? Like, I know people who have played on the same terrain layout hundreds of times. And like, they've played hundreds of times on each type of terrain layout. And at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, this is why you don't care what the other person does in deployment, is because you've played this terrain. You know exactly where all of the shooting lines are. You know exactly how to stage your stuff to get up to the middle of the table safely. Like, at what point is that not fun anymore?
I mean, I will say, when 10th started, I was like, oh, WTC terrain is better for 10th. But the longer we're into it, the more I'm kind of like, as some of the shooting nonsense of the early, like, Wraith Knights and stuff like that has gotten resolved out, I actually like UKTC, because you can't hide everything. So then you're somewhat like confronted with, like, again, choices. And even though that is still very regimented, there is something to be said about, like, imperfect terrain for the purpose.
Yeah.
It's like, the more you're forced to make choices, the more fun the game is.
Yeah. I feel like, as somebody who likes to play casually, and I used to laugh at people who would be like, but my immersion. But, like, in a way, it is a little bit, it kind of takes you out of the game a little bit if, like, there's a map for terrain. Because if you were actually in a conflict, you wouldn't have necessarily just, like, the perfect terrain. Like, you would have problems that you need to solve, and you'd have to make those tactical decisions. So I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of the terrain layouts. I understand why they're there, is because it's just a super killy game and it has to be like that. But as a casual player, it hurts me deep in my soul.
I mean, but even coming back to the points thing, like, I feel like we're solving the killiness in the wrong direction. We're like, oh, everything kills everything, so we'll just keep giving you more stuff so that you can't die as fast, because, like, everything is so cheap. Like, I don't know, like war dogs and armigers should not be under 200 points.
I agree. They should, like, I look at the price of a Lehman Russ and I go, why?
Yeah.
Why? There's no way that these are even on par with one another in terms of damage output. No way. Or reliability. Or speed. Or melee punch. Like, it's I've got to the point where I was like, don't even tell me how much that costs for points. Don't even tell me, because every time I look at how much guard stuff costs, I'm just like, why?
Well, like, a Predator Annihilator is 130 points right now, and it is less tanky than a War Dog or Armiger, and I think you can get some of those for like 140 points. And, like, the not as good ones, but even that, I think some of them are 150 points. So I'm like, the amount you get for 20 more points, because, like, I have, like, a tin can that explodes when you look at it funny, and you have a moves 12 inches, has a melee weapon, has, like, a super melt-a-gun, and has a 5-up invuln, and is your, like, battle line unit. Like, it just doesn't... Knights don't fit in 40k as a faction. I will never stop saying that. Allies, fine. Faction, no. Yeah.
I tend to agree. I think that they're fine as allies. But yeah. I've always said that I think GW has problems balancing certain types of units, planes being one, and super heavies are another. So they're either way too good or way too bad, and there's just, like, they're not consistent across the board either. So some are, like, amazing and some are really bad. Like, even within the knights themselves, right? Some are amazing and some you never see on the table. It's just like a balance issue for sure.
Well, I think there's a lot, like Votan, they can't seem to figure out the archetype for them. They're like, are they, Horde army or are they elite? And they're just like, I don't know.
Yeah. They're good. Votan are great.
Sometimes they're great. Like, we've had them for 2 editions now, and I feel like they're either, like, broken or, like, they're either broken in, like, the worst way or broken in the, like, they are unplayable way.
Yeah.
And they just seem to, like, swing back and forth between those 2 points.
Yeah.
Because it's just, like, There are hits on 4s, maybe sometimes, possibly army, but they like Tau is a shooting army that hits on 4s. Guard is a shooting army that hits on 4s. You can only be so good when you miss half your shots, and you can give them ways to hit on 3s, but there's always still a sacrifice or a resource to be managed, and thus it doesn't really matter how good they are, because if you just keep rolling 2s and 3s, they suck, and you will eventually roll 1s, 2s, and 3s.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why, for me, I just have to go back to playing orcs for a little while. I never really managed to understand the timing of the wah, but at the same time, I don't know, just the punching damage output potential for orcs is really fun, and maybe I just need to play super aggressive, and that's kind of my goal actually for this upcoming RTT, is just to play as orky as I possibly can to see if that's going to help me figure out how the wah turn works, because it's been 2 editions now where I haven't really enjoyed playing guard, and I think I just really need to put them aside for a little while and just basically focus on yelling wah and running across the board as fast as possible.
There is something, I mean,
it's elegant.
Chaos Space Marines in a very similar way. My mantra is usually ABC, always be charging. And there is something elegant about just I'm gonna run at you. You can either kill me or I'm going to kill you. And we're gonna have fun, and you're gonna have the opportunity to kill me, but if you don't, you're going to die.
Yeah.
And, just having it out. I played against World Eaters recently, and it was just we just went go. And
is it ever a bad time playing against World Eaters? I don't think so either.
And every time I play World Eaters, it's I don't know who's gonna win. It's basically whoever leaves enough stuff behind to score at the end of the game will probably win. But the 3 turns before you even start thinking about that, you're just charge.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone beats each other up, and it's fun. And you're just pulling models off the table, and orcs are the same way.
Yep.
And I feel more people should just enjoy the pure joy of every time I go against Space Marines, I'm just oh, you have fun chargy things, and they're no, this is mostly a shooting army. And I'm why? You have all the fun things. You missed the plot.
Yeah, and I think I've also been trying to play in a competitive way. I've been trying to match my local area, and I think I just need to stop doing that, and I just need to role play my faction. So that is my goal. This weekend, everything is going to be painted. Everything is going to be based beautifully, and I'm just going to literally just role play a war boss. In this case, probably a big mech, and just go at it.
There's something to be said again when you're playing against hyper meta players, that if you don't play the way they're expecting you to play, is also where you can beat them.
Yeah.
Because you either out meta them, or you confuse them so much that they make mistakes.
Yeah.
And if you're just having a good time, you're wahing to your heart's content and just living your best orc life.
Yeah.
Then the Necron player that's I will be sitting here and on these objectives is just gonna be what? Why are you on my face? Why do you have more OC than me? Why is everything here? I don't want it to be here. And you're just too bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But at least I do feel this Orc Codex allows you to roleplay in the way that you want, right? So if you want to just roleplay as a war boss surrounded by all your favorite boys, you can do that. If you want to be a big mech with all your favorite toys, you can do that. So big mech, Wall Mistress. She's coming.
I'm excited for you. But no, I think coming back to the original point, I think it's good actually that there's more of a thematic element to this, because ninth was also kind of boring in the end because they'd lost the like fluff.
Mm-hmm.
And if 10th is their attempt to like get it back, we've talked about a dozen reasons why they could do it better, but I think fundamentally, if you're following the fluff through, then at the very least there'll always be a fun way. Like one of the reasons I was getting so tired of the index, I didn't want to, it wasn't the way I wanted to play my army.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have fun with it because it didn't do what I wanted. When I like read about like Renegade, I was like, go fast. I'm just gonna go fast. I'm just gonna go and be wherever I want to be and just like blazing around. I think I was describing my first list as like it's a glass sword. It's not even a glass cannon because there is not enough range in it. It is like either I cut you up to pieces or I will disintegrate in a shower of shards of glass, because there is no beef to it. And that excites me in a way that I have not felt excited about 10th since probably like last June.
Yeah, that's actually a really good shout, because I think that's why I didn't enjoy Index Orcs, right? And then I also think that's why I didn't enjoy Index Astra Militarum, because Astra Militarum requires you to stay still. I don't want to stay still. Like, half the fun for me is the movement phase. I want to be maneuvering around the board, and I want to be constantly moving and just like have to sit there in order to get my bonuses. Like, it just doesn't seem fun in any way, shape, or form. So, but yeah, the Orcs Codex has a way for me to play the way that I always wanted to play, because even in Index, I was playing a Morkanaut and a Gorkanaut list, right? And now I just have rules to do it better. So I'm very, very excited. Hopefully it works out for me.
That with the new detachment, my Chaos Bikers are potentially going to be able to move 42 inches in one turn. If like absolutely everything moved its maximum, like max charge, max advance, and then there's also a stratagem to move them after the fight phase, 12 inches. They would move 42 inches in one turn, which is just like mind-bogglingly stupid, where you're just like, hey, you were on one side of the board and now you were on the opposite end of the board. Deal with that. That's silly, and it's fun, and it's like it's idiots on bikes, which is what Chaos Bikers are, and I love that idea. So no, that's the part that's exciting to me, is like finding the fun, not necessarily finding the like the gut punch, like I'm gonna win every tournament I go to. It's like I'm just gonna do silly things and then figure out how to play the game around the silliness that I want to do.
Yeah. I think for me, I think that the element of LARPing at the table is going to really make it so that even if I'm at the bottom, and even if at the bottom everybody's got super tough lists, I think it's not going to matter in the end.
This is ultimately a game. We are all meant to be having fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any last thoughts?
I think that what I would like people to take away from everything is, like, if you are unhappy with how things are going in your area or the type of games that you can get in, maybe consider being a tournament organizer or an event organizer and just trying out things that you think would be more fun and seeing if you can find your people.
Yeah. I like that 1,500 point idea. I think that could be a lot of fun.
I think so too.
I think that would be a good, especially for like a more narrative. Yeah, just having less stuff.
And having more time to like just decompress at the table. You can still have your 3-hour games, but have less stuff to actually do. I think it could be fun.
Yeah, you definitely wouldn't. You'd have games where you actually don't go the full 3 hours more often.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to Chaos Divided wherever you're listening from, and you can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Chaos Divided 40K. If you're a fan of what we're doing, you want to join our growing Wholesome Hammer community, you can find us on patreon.com/Chaos Divided 40K and support the show. And if you'd like to find us and connect with us directly, we're at thewar.mistress on Instagram and Tanya Gates on YouTube.
That's correct. Yep.
Bam. And at Blushing Noise Marine and at Nurgle_Snurgle on Instagram and YouTube. And until next time, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.